Hello viewers, my name is George and I'm from Ireland. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about how the United Kingdom will benefit from Brexit. In case you don't know, Brexit is a portmanteau of British exit. The United Kingdom is leaving the European Union. That's supposed to be complete by March 2019. It's consequent upon a referendum result from the 23rd of June this year. The new Prime Minister Theresa May says she'll activate Article 50 of the Treaty of Lisbon, formally notifying the EU that the UK is going to withdraw, and that's a process which takes up to 2 years. If not completed, the UK is automatically out of the EU. Anyway, so here are 5 reasons. I could talk for hours, but I've got to keep it succinct. The first one is sovereignty. The United Kingdom will regain its sovereignty. Since the UK joined the European Economic Community, as it then was, on New Year's Day 1973, the UK has pooled its sovereignty with other EEC states. Well, it's now the EU. And I know Eurosceptics like me sometimes use more emotive language such as surrendered, but we'll say, okay, the UK shared its sovereignty. The United Kingdom has some say in the affairs of France, as France has some say in the affairs of the UK. And the UK will no longer have to do that. So the United Kingdom will make its own laws entirely. A lot of the time, Parliament was simply implementing directives from the EU, and obviously the UK had some role in that, but it was very limited because the European Commission is appointed and not elected. The UK is very underrepresented per capita population of the European Commission. One commissioner per member state. The European Parliament, the UK is very underrepresented. The smallest countries, such as Malta, have 12 times the per capita representation of the largest EU states. The European Court of Justice will no longer be adjudicating on matters affecting the UK. The ECJ is the European Union's court. The European Court of Human Rights will only be able to deliver advisory opinions because the European Convention on Human Rights will no longer be domesticated in UK law. I know the UK helped to draw up the European Convention on Human Rights in 1948, but it wasn't part of the UK's domestic law until 2000. The ECHR, well, much of it's uncontroversial. Some of the untendentious things are that torture is not allowed or there must be fair trials. Much of that is praiseworthy and has been in British law for centuries. But there are parts of it which are much more debatable. It's highly contentious whether freedom of expression is less important than, say, the right to privacy. I slightly favour the former, but it's not a cut and dried thing, as in we'd have no liberty or no human rights if it was the other way round. We'll have fewer foolish and unjust laws, such as the notorious Bent Bananas Directive. And I know Europhiles tend to deny it, but it is true. Sometimes I should quote you chapter and verse on precisely that EU directive, about how the fingers of bananas mustn't have excessive curvature. There have been grossly unjust rulings in the ECHR, such as the Gibraltar shootings, when some terrorists were about to set off a bomb and the SAS shot them dead. Turned out the people killed were not armed at that moment, but that wasn't known. Now, admittedly, judgment was before the ECHR was domesticated in the UK, but the UK still abided by its rulings. Where was I? I mean, people who say the ECHR is so wonderful often are the people who say, oh, but the army behaved terribly in Iraq. And if that were true, then the ECHR would be useless. Anyway, we'll also have less waste. The United Kingdom pays an awful lot more to the EU than it receives back. The EU is very wasteful, moving its parliament from Brussels to Strasbourg and back several times a year, creating a big carbon footprint. So much for the European Union caring about the environment. The Common Agricultural Policy is something which the UK pays into and receives very little back for. The UK has only got about 2% of its population in farming, whereas other countries like France have a much higher proportion, and so it's really designed for them. They're a massive net gainer from that one. The Common Fisheries Policy, that's one of the reasons why Norway and Iceland didn't join the EEC in the 70s, and the British fishing grounds have been decimated. Some species of fish are close to extinction there from overfishing, and the 70 days tie-up. The British fishing fleet has been hugely reduced. Some fishing villages have been ruined. Another reason, there'll be no bailouts to pay for poorer EU states such as Greece, so that'll be a benefit. Immigration will be controlled. I want immigration, but a smaller amount, and selecting the individuals, not discriminating on nationality. If you come from an EU state, you can definitely come to the UK. If you're from outside the EU, it's a massive headache to get a visa, even if you're a much more desirable individual. So we can have a sensible, needs-based immigration policy. Net 300,000 a year is far too much. If it was net 50,000 that was in the mid-90s, that'd be fine. Admittedly, about half of the immigration comes from the EU, and I realise that some British people live in other EU states. So we've always had immigration and emigration. I don't want to reduce that to zero. I just want to reduce it to a sensible number, and I don't know what the magic number is. There'll be less red tape. There's legislative hyperactivity in the EU, partly because there's so many bodies, and often it's very secretive. And there's co-decision between the Council of Ministers and the Council. I could call it the Council of Europe, but that's not its official name anymore, and the European Parliament. So we'll really know what's going on and not have pages and pages of drivel legislation. Other EU states just break it willy-nilly, like I did in Romania. Selling food by the street without a license is illegal under EU law, but it happened on a huge scale. Or keeping animals in your garden for domestic consumption, again, that's not allowed, but it happened a lot. Other EU states break the law all the time, like France and Germany. Remember when the euro was launched, breaking the Growth and Stability Pact and getting away with it. And the UK is one of the few ones which really keeps the law and suffers therefrom. Another thing is there'll be no more excessive expansion. The EU is megalomaniacal, always wanting to have more countries in. Tony Blair saying Albania must be allowed to join. Morocco even applied in the 80s when it was the EEC. There was talk of the Ukraine joining, and that's one of the factors behind this Ukrainian Civil War. There was the intervention in Libya. Yes, the EU voted for that. The EU has its own foreign policy. I know the United Kingdom chose to do it, and not just the EU. But anyway, the EU often exacerbates these things. I know the United Kingdom is capable of messing up on its own, but the EU seems to make these things more frequent and more severe. If it was some sort of confederation of countries around the North Sea, that might make sense, when there's quite a lot of commonality. Geographical contiguity is not my thing. I don't think that's very relevant. Some cultural similarity or prosperity might work, but that was the problem with the EU. Like lots of mega states, it overexpanded. So these are some of the reasons why I am fully behind Brexit. Only 90% sure it's a good thing. I think it will improve the economy, but I've never studied economics. I'm not certain on that. In politics and economics, one can only make an educated guess. Even the wisest people sometimes get it wrong. But even if it did make the British economy worse, I would still be in favour of it. People say that Scotland will leave the UK because of this. I don't think so. I could be wrong. Polls still show that most people in Scotland would vote to stay in the UK even after the United Kingdom departs the EU, partly because the oil prices are down. Depends how sensibly Brexit is handled. I favour a Turkey-type deal, free trade but not free movement of people. The UK might have to pay some subvention in order to get that. Northern Ireland leaving the UK join the Republic of Ireland, though I don't want that. That might happen, might have happened anyway. I think it's improbable, as opinion polls show. As I say, a lot of it is going to be how well Brexit is handled and what the economic consequences are. In the short term, there'll probably be some downturn. This usually happens when there's a change of this magnitude. But I suspect the change will not be as revolutionary as some Europhiles fear or as some Eurosceptics hope. That's all for today.